I'm Troy Thompson. Over the last 15 years, our family has worked hard to create a place we call the center of the universe. A place where our kids and someday our grandkids can come home to and laugh, have fun, learn how to work, pray, worship God, and be a place to celebrate life with all our friends. After a quarter century in uniform, I put away one set of boots for another, working on our acreage, improving the land, fixing some structures, and building new ones. We say, give back to the community, be useful, keep your hands calloused, and spread the gospel. This is a little place in a little state right in the middle of flyover country, from which cries out a voice in the wilderness to all who might want to listen, learn, and laugh along with us. This is our American dream. Hello, friends and neighbors, and welcome to the Sunnyside of life. So glad that you are with me today on Monday, the 11th of March. And so I've got with me, speaking of the number 11, after it's been the 11 years since he retired from NYPD, and now he's been in the town of Forest City, where Sunnyside is broadcasting from every week, and has been a part of the community for a while now, has got the ice cream shop, which we're going to talk about, and then, of course, he's a new member of the school board, so I see him every month in that regard as well. Ladies and gentlemen, Rick Wiley. Hi, Rick.
Hi, Troy. How are you?
I'm very, very glad that you're out here, and congratulations on retiring 11 years.
Thank you.
Yeah, so how's that feel? The same as it did at 10 and 9 and 8 and 7.
Yeah, except being married to my wife, we don't really know what retired is. So
that's exactly right. Yeah, yes.
You back to work.
You and your wife, Christy, have got, a couple of businesses that I know of. Maybe you've got more than that, but you've got Cabin Coffee.
Correct.
And so if you love coffee, that's a great place to have coffee, especially if you're coming through Forest City, where it's right there on Highway 69, and that's a great place there. And then, of course, just uptown, a few more blocks. We call it uptown, but, there's not a ton of businesses uptown as much as I'm glad you're there on Clark Street, which is our main street in Forest City. And you've got Sweet Emmy Lou's.
Yes.
Which is an ice cream shop.
It is an ice cream shop. We do both soft serve and hard packed ice cream. We get our hard pack from Wisconsin, so it's chocolate chop ice cream.
All right, the real deal.
The real deal.
Yeah, and so I got to know, how did you? We're going to talk about your background, your life story, and how you get to where you are today. But that is the first question I'm going to ask. How do you go from being being a police officer and in emergency services to Iowa?
So,
because you don't sound like you're from here.
No, I hear that a lot.
Yeah. Where are you from? Yeah.
First off, everybody here just listens funny. It's not that I have an accent.
That's it. That's it.
That's what I'm going with.
Yep.
So I'll give you the story that I went with on my wedding vows, and that I love pizza. So I consider myself to be a pizza aficionado. Mm-hmm. There was this white panel van with no windows, and it said free pizza, and I should have asked to see the pizza first. And there was a rag of chloroform, and I woke up in Forest City, Iowa.
Perfect. That's how we get a lot of our best people.
Yeah. So Christy and I dated back in the day when we were in our 20s.
Okay.
She went from Osage, Iowa to Connecticut, and she was working there as a nanny. And we actually wound up meeting through an ad.
Really?
Yeah, an ad that, the old-fashioned print ads where you actually had to read.
Right.
And we
in the newspaper?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we met and we started dating.
That's a country song.
It is.
Wanted one good-hearted woman. And they talk about the guy places an ad in the paper. And kids today would be like, what's that? How does that even work? Swipe right.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
So we dated for a while. And my first trip to Iowa was for Christy's 21st birthday.
Okay.
I drove out to come see her because she had gone home.
You drove all the way out here?
I drove out here from New York.
Uh-huh.
she had gone home because it was her 21st birthday and she's born on Christmas. So there you have it. So I made a pilgrimage out to Iowa from New York.
And how is there an age difference? I don't even know.
3 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're 24. What was your impression of Iowa at that age?
I liked it. It was just the trip here was real different. I have been to rural parts of states before, but I have never ever in my life seen so much farmland. And coming from the concrete jungle, it was a little spooky.
Yeah. Also a country song, Wide Open Spaces. Yes. Look, we've got it figured out. That's not going to be a theme. I'm not going to try to make it a theme today, but it's just coming up that way.
And God, it was just, I drove through snow from Ohio all the way to here. And like when I finally got here, I was like, oh my God. It was just, it was strange for somebody that's never seen the country like that. Like I had been up and down the East Coast and you've stopped in small towns along the way. But I've never been that far away from the ocean before. So you know, like this was all new. Yeah.
That is a downside to the Midwest is we don't have an ocean.
I'm perfectly happy with that.
Okay.
At one point in my life, because of the ocean, I lost everything I owned.
Oh, really?
Hurricane Sandy came in and I was a little too close to the ocean and it filled my house with water and took all my possessions and put them underwater. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess that's one of the advantages of living on the East Coast is that you do get most of the news coverage. So, like, I heard of Hurricane Sandy, and all of us were like, hurricanes?
Yeah.
Why are you so close to the water? You know, but everybody is. And even if you go from, you know, one town to another, small towns in you know, the oldest part of our country like that, they're really not that far apart. And so you're not in the open for that long, you know. I mean, you're quickly coming upon another little town, and so it's you get out here, it's a little. Is there another town? Is there ever going to be another town out here?
Yeah, I've learned a lot about making sure I fill my gas tank up when I find a gas station. Yeah,
and also they are not always open 24 hours.
No, that was
people got to sleep, Rick.
It's an adjustment that and it's a good adjustment.
Yeah.
I'm actually happy to see that, but it took a little while to get used to when you start a project at 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon that, you know, hey, you're going to go over to Mason City, but make sure that you have every possible piece of this puzzle that you need, because when you discover that you're missing that washer, they're not going to be open.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's something very different. But it took you a while to get back here. So, but before that all happened, you came out. You stopped in Osage, drove all the way, halfway across the country, and to celebrate Christy's 21st birthday. And how'd that go? Because this was Christmas time too.
Yep, it went well. Work pulled me in another direction.
Okay.
And I thought I did the right thing, and kind of we went our own separate ways. And we probably spent a little while. Well, we both spent quite a while trying to find each other. Christy eventually got married. At some point I got married also.
Okay.
And with the name change, it was near impossible to find her. And after we both got,
I mean, you were a cop though. I mean,
yeah. They frown upon the use of official computers for personal use, and
Well, it's good to know that never happens. I'm glad.
Yeah, and they
glad.
might consider trying to find your ex stalking.
Oh,
some
so many rules.
Yeah,
A lot of rules like that.
I don't remember. There might have been a piece of paper written up about this, placed in someone's folder. I don't,
okay.
I don't know.
Good.
But anyway, after Christy got divorced, she actually found my business page. I had moved out of New York and I was living in Florida.
Oh,
and I was a real estate agent, and well, we finally reconnected, and
then you drove back. Did you drive back to drove back to Iowa?
and well, yeah, I drove back to Iowa just from a different direction.
Yeah,
got to see another part of the country that I had never seen, which was kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
And here I am.
Yeah. Wow. So, real estate in Florida. In between that, you said you went back to your career pulled you in another direction. You were pretty young when you started in emergency services.
So I started out in emergency services when I was 18. I pursued a career as an emergency medical technician.
Okay.
While I was doing some college and finishing high school. I did that, and then I eventually got hired for New York City EMS.
Mm-hmm.
And from EMS, I went to the New York City Police Department it was pretty much weeks of each other of getting hired or in the hiring process. So I went and did that. I was 20 years old at that point. Got hired for the police department.
And so NYPD.
So the NYPD, it covers, they are counties, but they call them boroughs.
Mm-hmm.
Covers all 5 boroughs of New York City. So there's Queens, Manhattan, the Bronx, Brooklyn, and Staten Island.
Okay.
So it covers all 5 of those boroughs. And then there's hundreds of units within the New York City Police Department.
Right.
You can.
It's like 30,000 people, isn't it? 30,000 police officers?
During our heyday, we were pushing 50.
Is that right?
Yeah.
That's a lot. I mean, the metro, that area, isn't it like 10 million people?
Yeah. And during the day.
3 times the state of Iowa.
Yeah. During the day, Manhattan, New York, Manhattan itself can probably have 15 or 20 million extra people that are just working inside of those office buildings. And then there's around 5 o'clock at night, there's a mass exodus of people that go back out to the burbs.
Yeah. And they'll travel quite a way, some of them.
Some of them travel from different states.
Yeah.
You
mentioned Connecticut. You hear that all the time. And
New Jersey, Connecticut, some even from Pennsylvania.
Okay.
There's different path trains that get them in and out from out of state.
Mm.
And then, of course, there's all sorts of trains and buses that run within the 5 boroughs of New York City that get them back home if they live in one of those areas.
And it's just something that, so I made an observation, a little non sequitur. We've been out to New York and, Manhattan. And so you're in Manhattan and you're like, wow, this is like, Wolf of Wall Street. This is where all the money is and everything like that. And then you're on the subway or whatnot. And, people are wearing business suits like you think that they would be, just like in the movies. But then you look a little closer and they're, business suits are a little ratted on the seams. Maybe they've been wearing them every day for who knows how many years, and their shoes are pretty, scruffed up and that type of thing. And you're like, oh, well, these people are, like here in Iowa, we'd be just probably wearing flannel shirts and whatever. But, it's the same thing, just a different dress code.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And, it's funny. Sometimes you'll get on the train and you'll look and somebody will be dressed up in 3-piece suit or a gorgeous work outfit. And then you'll look down at their feet and they're in a pair of flip-flops or they're in a pair of sneakers because they don't want to wear their good shoes on that dirty subway train or walk through, walk for blocks on end in that. And they leave like clothes somewhere else, like at work.
Right.
It's kind of funny.
Yeah. So that's so you're 18, and then you get into the EMS, become an EMT, get into, like you said. So you have to go to the police academy,
I did.
just like in the movies.
Yep. Not quite as funny
No?
as the movie itself, but we did have a good time.
Yeah.
I got hired under a federal act called Safe Streets, Safe Cities.
Okay.
So we pushed probably a little over 2,000 people through the New York City Police Academy while I was there.
Oh, so this is in the 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think Clinton administration had that act that they pushed through, and that lasted for a number of years. I think it did have a expiration date at one point, but so that's what you came in under that.
I came in under that.
Okay.
So the hiring process was kind of comical because in New York, you are allowed to take the New York City police exam at the age of 16 and a half.
Really?
Yep. So, because thousands of people take this test.
Okay.
And then they start to weed through it, and they do a background before you get to your background, and they call so many people at a time. And now I think they do it a little differently, where they kind of give one almost every day and they do it online. At least that's one of the last ads that I had seen. And someone told me that one of my friends' kids were telling me they were taking the test. And
Yeah.
it's like, oh, when are they giving it? He's like, oh, I just go in and go online and I can take it tomorrow.
Okay.
So anyway, at the time in the early 90s when I was taking this test, we would fill high schools, and they would have high schools all over the city that you would get assigned one, and you would go to whatever high school, and they filled this building up with people taking this exam. So I took the test. I was 16 and a half by like a day. And when I'm 18, I get called, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to become a cop.
Really? They just keep a record.
And so I
That's
get called, and I walked in, and thinking about it now, he probably wasn't that old, but I'm standing there, and there's this old man who was a sergeant wearing sergeant stripes. He was standing there, and he said, I walk in, and I'm in that suit that you were talking about earlier, probably a little tattered.
Yeah.
And he looks at me and he goes, hey kid, what are you here for, your first communion? And I look at this guy and I'm like, what? I'm afraid to talk to him.
Yeah.
Because, everything is shut up, go here. You be quiet, no talking in this line.
Yeah.
Do you have a blue pen? So he looks at me and he pulls me out of line and he goes, does your mother know you're here? And I was like, yes, sir. She dropped me off. And he like smacks his head. And
Yeah.
how old are you? I said, I'm 18. He goes, go to that line over there.
Yeah.
So I'm like, what? He's like, we don't want you. And I was like, what? Just go to that line. So I go down this line, and they actually had a hold. They had to hold my exam number open for me so that I actually did not have to retest. And when I turned 20, I got the phone call like, hey, your exam is still active for you. Come on in. We're going to hire you.
I mean, what is on this test that you can get it at 16 and a half?
I got to be honest with you. I don't really remember the test all that well.
Wow.
They ask you a bunch of questions. It's a lot of
scenario type things,
a little bit of logic, some math. Okay. Basic, some of your basic life skills that you just should have, and you need to pass the exam.
Okay. All right. And so you're 20 and you become, you get to go to the academy.
I get to go to the
academy.
You get to go.
Yeah. And is that in New York City?
It is in New York City. It was actually, they moved it probably about 8-9 years ago now, but it was actually on 20th Street, 2nd Avenue. They had a building. It was ancient. It was really small. Little to no air conditioning in the building. And we packed this place because of Safe Streets, Safe Cities. And each classroom in the building had, some 25 to 30 people in it. And
how many people would be in a class, so to speak, that was, from start to finish?
So we started out with probably about 2,000 people, and I don't know how many people actually graduated. They never gave us the failure rate of or the dropout ratio.
Mm-hmm. Okay. How long did it take?
It was 6 months.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then did you go home every night, or did you have to stay there?
No. It was go home every night.
Okay.
I believe the only academy in New York that actually makes you stay over is the New York State Troopers.
Oh, okay. What are they doing?
It's a very, very militaristic academy.
Yeah.
Lots of stuff like that where they just try to keep people up day and night, in and out, different scenarios to see how you function. That's my understanding. I've actually never been through the New York State.
Sit still. I said, I can't. Something's tickling me. She thought I was crazy. She said, well, open your coat. I unbuttoned my coat and opened it up. There was a mouse.
Stories. Everybody has them. The stories of our parents, grandparents, and our friends remind us who they are.
That's kind of what I think it is too, is memories. Growing up, my dad was an English teacher.
How they got here and what they've learned on the way. What if you could collect as many of your loved ones' stories in a high-quality audio format to keep forever? What if you could share the sound of your loved one's voice, their laughter, and their thoughtful manner with your children? Or when you are simply driving to work?
He spent literally 3 months in North Dakota freezing buckets of ice water to make this awesome ice fort that we never spent time in, but it was amazing. For the moment it was done.
Well, you can with a Sunnyside of Life biography. Produced here at Sunnyside Farm Studios. I'll sit down with your loved one for 1, 2, or several sessions to record their stories.
I think my students are going to have good memories of me.
You'll receive the full raw recording, an edited selection arranged in audio chapters for easy reference, and produced segments you can use for family gatherings, special moments, or any time you just want to hear your loved one's voice.
And those are probably my most cherished things.
Share it with your family and make it a keepsake, because that's what stories are. Keepsakes of the time we had together.
Never forget that. I was petrified of mice after that forever.
Email your query for more information to Troy at sunnysidefarmstudios.com. The email is also in this show's notes. Let me record your loved one's story so you can share the sunny side of their life in their own words for years to come.
I actually do kind of remember that now.
You grew up in New York. So which borough did you grow up in?
I grew up in Queens, probably about 10 minutes from LaGuardia Airport.
Okay. All right. Went to school, everything, just all in Queens.
Yeah.
And what made you want to be a police officer? Was it family or just a personal interest, or?
It was personal interest. I had some family that were police officers, but it just always looked like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And I wanted to make a difference in people's lives.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, in the 90s too, I think, who was mayor then? Was that Giuliani yet?
No, Giuliani
He came later.
When I got hired, it was David Dinkins.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, that was coming out of, or just starting to come out of some tough times. New York in the 80s had some troubles, early 90s. And then, of course, Giuliani gets credit for a lot of, cleaning up in the glass, broken windows and all that other stuff. Yeah. But so you got to experience all that.
I did. So I got hired and I actually wound up working in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. I got there just as the riots were finishing up.
Okay.
So that was
the timing.
Yeah, that was an interesting time to be there.
Yeah.
A lot of tension in the neighborhood.
What was that about again? Go ahead. I'm only familiar with Crown Heights because I think was it Manuel? No, the guy who did Hamilton. Like, he also has a musical about Crown Heights. Anyway, go ahead. Yeah.
What started the riot?
Yeah. His name was Steve Escobar, and he would no, I don't.
I believe his name was Yankel Rosenbaum. He was stabbed by an individual, and then there was some retribution of people that thought that this one person did it, so they attacked someone else, and then it just erupted after that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's tensions. I mean, you've got boroughs and you've got neighborhoods, and that means a lot. That means a lot different than when we say, well, we're in the neighborhood out here, because our towns are so small that like it's not even a neighborhood in New York. Yeah.
Neighborhoods, they encompass a vast majority of people. People hang on to their ethnicity very much in New York, especially in the 5 boroughs of New York City.
Okay.
So you have areas that are very Greek, very Indian, very Irish, very Italian. And
Wait, there's a lot of Italians?
yeah, there are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
We always, so I've talked about other things but on the show, and we've a good Irish descent there, but mostly Norwegian, a lot of Norwegian, German, and that type of thing. And one thing that I've noted on this show in the past is that unlike the Irish and many of the other European nations that emigrated into the United States, the Norwegians, they did not stop in the big cities. I mean, they might have come through. A lot of them came through Chicago, actually, but they even if they came through New York, they got the heck out. Like they did not stick around. They wanted to get out to the wide open spaces.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's different. But that's kind of the cool thing about New York too, is that that they have all of those. I mean, there's a real culture, or cultures, I should say.
It's a melting pot of people. And if I had to tell you that I miss something, I miss the actual ethnic food
Sure.
that each of these cultures bring with them, and not the Americanized version of their food.
Yeah.
Because a lot of them have made stuff for the palate of wherever they go.
Yes.
Whereas when
you're saying that sour cream isn't part of Mexican food?
No, I don't believe it to be, but don't quote me.
All right. Well, that's a shocker,
Right. So, like you can, like if most people had authentic sweet and sour Chinese chicken, they would be very surprised to know that if you got it authentically, it would not look like a puff pastry. So things like that.
Right.
But I miss that part of the culture where you can go and you can actually you can find both versions of food,
of course,
and drink, but when you go, you can actually get that home cooked ethnic version that you would actually get in that country.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Obviously, we get a different version. Yeah, like you said. So, so you started in Crown Heights.
Yep.
And so you're in a precinct. Is that how it is?
Yeah. So
I mean, I watch Blue Bloods, so I'm an expert.
Yeah. No. That's yeah. I mean, exactly.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Although I will tell you that they don't give away those take-home cars that they have on Blue Bloods.
What?
Well, maybe the police commissioner, but
I bet the commissioner has that.
He gets
a courtesy card, they call him.
Yeah. He would get that.
Yeah.
But, almost everybody else, they have to have a lot of what we would call scrambled egg on their hat to usually get that take-home car.
The average patrolman does not.
Yeah, you're not getting that.
No.
Sorry.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. That's good to know. Were you in Crown Heights for a long time?
I spent my first 5 years working in Crown Heights, Brooklyn.
Okay.
The precinct was about a square mile.
That's it.
Yeah. And we turned out, and keep in mind that each of these vehicles are a minimum of two people.
Okay.
We turned out a minimum of 8 what they call sector cars.
Okay.
So each command is divided into letters, and each with boundaries. You're obviously allowed to cross the boundaries and go into the next person's area, but they would have little letters on them, and each sector, that was the area that you were assigned to do patrol in your free time if you had it. And precinct was, like I said, a square mile, and we had 8 two-man cars as a minimum, with usually 2 specialty cars that were out there to pick up the backfill for a square mile.
Wow. That's amazing. But how many people, though, are in that square mile? And was it based on population, or is it just how that's how it was set up?
It was based on how busy we were. Because it's not necessarily the population, it's how busy the population keeps you.
Okay. Yeah.
And I'll say this up front, 90 to 95% of every community, they're good people.
Of course. Yeah.
And as a police officer, it's about 5% of that population that keep you busy. So you spend 95% of your day dealing with the 5%.
And it's the same 5% usually.
Usually. Yeah.
So you get to know people pretty well.
You do.
Right.
You do. So they would keep you pretty busy.
Okay.
And we had some areas that were pretty tough in that command, and certain buildings that we would go to would require to have 2 or 3 cars to go there, because they would take the tires off the police car. They would break the windows. They would slash the tires.
Oh, no.
You would get
it. It was like Police Academy.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
You would get what we would call airmail, where buckets of tar or buckets of whatever would come flying off the roof. And so some of that was a little tough to digest.
What was the relationship between your community in that precinct, or in any precinct? Like, what was that relationship with the people like?
So you had a good relationship with the good people. They were happy to see you. Unfortunately, we were usually there because something bad happened to one of them. But we had a good relationship with the good people of the community. Obviously, the criminal element was not very fond of us, because
right.
They would usually have to leave with us and get that one-way taxi ride with the silver bracelets that came along with it.
Nice. Yeah. Well, you get jewelry.
Yeah.
And they all go to Rikers Island.
Well, some form thereof. Yeah.
I don't know.
So yeah.
I watch Blue Bloods. So you go. Well, that's so. You didn't stay though, and you went from Crown Heights to where?
I went from Crown Heights. I got transferred into Queens, and I actually worked in the 115 precinct for quite a few years. And then after working there for a while, I was picked up by a task force unit, and I started working in the specialty units of the police department. Thereafter.
Nice. Like what is it, intel or something, or
so
was there a special one just for making murals, maybe, or were you in a mural unit? Just
no. I'm not that artistic.
Okay.
So task force, when it started, was there to help backfill commands that needed help.
Okay.
When we were not occupied with, we did a lot with disorder control. A little bit of counterterrorism work. Okay. Things of that nature.
What time, when is this? So, you're in the 90s. Are you still in the 90s at this point? Or are you in the, when do we get to 9/11? You were there for that.
So for 9/11, I was actually still in task force. I got to task force in the early part of 2000.
Okay.
Yeah.
So. And, that was obviously an incredibly impactful, terrible situation, and you were right there in the midst of it. What was your role in that?
So 9/11, my life was actually saved, 9/11, by a gentleman who actually tried to commit suicide and landed on me.
Okay, I continue.
So gentleman's brother had come in contact with the police and tried to attack some police officers, and ultimately he was shot. I had responded to that scene, and I was not needed, so I was leaving that scene, and this gentleman had found out that his brother had tragically died, and he tried to jump out of a second-story window.
Okay.
Nobody knew he was going to do this.
Right.
I happened to be walking back to my car, and when he came out the window, he landed on me, which
Okay.
knocked me to the ground.
Yeah.
And I wound up tearing my ACL.
Okay.
And for 9/11, I was actually out and scheduled for knee surgery.
Really?
Yes.
So that had happened a while earlier. How many, like days, weeks, or
So this was probably about 5 weeks before
Okay.
9/11 happened.
Yeah.
And the scary part was that when I had gotten back to work, I was actually found a notification in my locker that on 9/11, I should have been directly across the street from the World Trade Center at the State Liquor Authority testifying at a hearing.
Really?
Yes. So chances are, if I was actually working that day doing what I was supposed to be doing, you and I would probably have never met.
That is crazy. Wow. Do you think that the guy was really trying to commit suicide if he was jumping out a second-story window, or did he like intend to attack you? And then when he realized that he's an idiot, he said, "Oh, I was just so overcome, I was trying to commit suicide." And he's like, "Well, listen, I mean, attacking a police officer or attempted suicide, two different things going on." Did anybody ask that question?
I'm sure somebody asked the question
Yeah.
along the way, and
Yeah.
I'll be honest with you.
It didn't cross your mind. You were dealing with something else.
Yeah, I was,
Yeah.
Dealing with
Yeah.
getting surgery and trying to get back to work.
Okay.
Well,
in the aftermath of 9/11, what was your perspective of the, I guess the demeanor, the culture of, or the environment, the atmosphere of the police department, and for that matter, all of the emergency services in New York?
well, everybody kind of banded together a little bit, became more of a brother/sisterhood with all the emergency service personnel. We all work together, whether it's police, fire, EMS, in some fashion at different jobs. But we probably had a little more respect for everybody else's job.
Yeah.
Made ourselves a little more accountable for everybody when we went somewhere, and not just like, EMS is going to handle that. Let's wait for them to get back to their ambulance before we leave. Let's make sure, that the fire department has whatever resources that they need prior to us going. The fire department would, at some point they would actually stop if we had somebody stopped on the side of the road instead of just driving by and, waving at us. They would actually take a little look at us once in a while.
Is there a rivalry between the NYPD and fire department? FDNY?
There's certain units that, you have a lot of crossover. So we have different units that cross over with the fire department, and sometimes there is a little rivalry of who can do it better, who can do it faster. Probably no different than the military boys.
Yeah, not really. Yeah, it's the same. Yeah.
So it's...
Well, they always, again, not to reference Blue Bloods, but my knowledge of this is largely based on some of that. And and do they call it a bus when they call an ambulance?
Yeah, so there's lots of weird terminologies.
Yeah.
So, a bus is an ambulance, which they learned a great lesson for during 9/11, because, you had officers in from all over the country trying to help. And, you'd have an officer from New York look and go get me a bus. And, whether the story's true or not, I wasn't there to actually see it. But, they apparently had an officer from out of state who commandeered a New York City bus and brought a bus to this officer who requested one.
Right.
So, bus driver with a bunch of people on it. Like, what am I doing here? And, the officer's like, no, I want a bus. And he's like, but I brought you a bus.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, they've over the years, they've probably tried to get rid of some of that, the in-house lingo and get people to speak in terms that, they need.
Yeah.
But it's a little tough.
Well, there was, articles written, books written about the triage, the lessons learned from 9/11, the work that the emergency services in New York following 9/11, all of the things that happened, the things that they learned, and how they, even in our national government, how they figured out that they needed to work together a whole hell of a lot better, and so maybe that communication, it probably starts there. Like, we can all be on the same page.
Yeah, that would, it becomes a little bit more helpful, especially if, and New York City being as big as it is, and having the resources that we had to ourselves, we were never really dependent on working together with outside agencies during a crisis.
Right.
Like, there was always joint operations between different government municipalities. That's the only way you can get many jobs done. But when you're at a building collapse on a normal day, it's going to be workers that work all together, and you're all speaking the same language, whether you're from the fire department, police department, EMS.
Right.
EMS understands when you say, hey, I need a bus.
Right.
They understand that that's them.
Yeah.
When the fire department says, hey, get a bus over to that officer, everybody understands that terminology.
Yeah.
And they all use it.
Yeah. Somebody somewhere originally said, bring me a bus. And they meant an ambulance. And it was like, he was the first guy. And the guy next to him was like, what are you talking about? I was like, an ambulance, bring me a bus. I'm going to call it a bus now. Yeah. And then like, okay, I'll call it a bus too. And then it just spreads.
Yeah, exactly.
Somebody coined a phrase at one point. We don't know when.
It happens.
I hear, I'm going to quit referencing Blue Bloods, I promise. But they say, because it takes it's NYPD, it's a big family, the Reagans, allegedly. And they have, they say not for nothing a lot, or not for nothing. And I'm always like, they just write that in there. Like, it's always like, if you wanted to, sound like you were from the South, you'd say y'all and whatever other colloquialisms you come up with, and then not for nothing. And New York. And I'm like, nobody says that. And then the other day, we were talking, and he said, hey, not for nothing. And I was like, I got a new legitimate one. So what does that mean? What does not for nothing mean? It probably makes perfect sense to you, but it seems like a double negative. And so what does it actually mean?
Well, when somebody says, well, not for nothing, it's like, I'm probably about to give you my opinion.
Yeah.
And it's
all things considered.
Yeah. It's,
right.
Why say it simply when we throw a not for nothing in there? And it's like, oh, well, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Somebody said not for nothing.
All right, what do we got here?
42-year-old white male dead. Looks like he's been eating souvlaki. Took the skewer right through his neck.
This is the fourth one this
Well,
week.
we called a bus, but there's not much point. The guy's cold as that iced coffee maker.
Any witnesses?
Plenty, but no one's
How about those cameras across the street?
Out of service.
ID?
Yeah, just a torn casting sheet, no name. Says he's a 42-year-old that can do it. Prick.
Yeah, well, the only impression this guy's gonna make is the one on the pavement.
You know, not for nothing, but ain't you the guy from the boy band back in the day?
Nah, you got me confused with somebody else.
Cuz you look familiar.
I get that a lot.
I know. You was in that Band of Brothers show.
Nope, I'm a veteran of the Corps.
Nah. I got a real sixth sense about these things.
Okay, let's focus on the crime at hand. I gotta solve this thing in the next 48 minutes.
You a Reagan?
Yeah, Detective Danny Reagan.
Your dad that detective guy from Hawaii?
He's the police commissioner.
Yeah, but before that, he was in Hawaii, right?
I don't think so. Look, I gotta take this call.
Well, who is it? Is it your sister?
If you must know, yeah, she's the DA.
Well, tell her to say hello to her ex-husband for me. I'm a big fan.
You're a fan of her ex-husband, the attorney?
Nah, come on, man. Her ex-husband's a goat. Tom Brady.
Get out of here with that. Go put that police tape around this Souvlaki guy so the opening credits can roll. Not for nothing.
Yeah.
It sounds very New York to me. And maybe that's like before we started recording this, you were talking about, what are the rules for the language on the podcast and that type of thing. And just coming from a background, I come from the military, you're coming from law enforcement and emergency service, all of this stuff. The language is pretty blue in a lot of just the day-to-day interactions. Love it or hate it, that's the way it is. And you had intimated that, well, if I walk up to a situation and I just politely ask somebody to step aside or to call whatever it happens to be, they don't listen to you. But if you let them know that via delivery that there's that the police are here and this is a serious or what I need you to move us, whatever you say, whether that includes expletives or whatever, people pay attention and they're like, oh, you want me to move? I got it. Right.
Yeah.
And maybe that's for like, not for nothing's not an expletive, but it's also kind of in that line of, pay attention now.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a colloquialism.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, it's, the Midwest uses needs done a lot. And to me, that's not a complete sentence.
Yeah. Where I don't say that. Do I say that? When do you give me an example?
Somebody will say the laundry needs done. The dishes need done.
Oh,
It's actually very Irish. The Irish say that a lot.
yeah. Well, yeah.
But it's just funny. Like
Right.
it's a colloquialism.
Yeah. That is correct. Yeah. Yeah. We all have those. And yeah, that's funny.
But I don't know where
Yeah.
it comes from. I don't know if it was used to grab somebody's attention.
Yeah.
And it probably was.
Yeah. Well, I like it, but it is funny that you actually used it, and I was like, "Oh, it's not just on Blue Bloods. That's cool." So there, I must be coming in there. Somehow.
Maybe I was watching an episode of.
You could have been. He's like, listen, when I call Troy, I'm going to say not for nothing. He's going to love that. You have well, I guess my impression of the people of New York, you kind of bridging from not for nothing. It seems. I don't think it's abrasive, but it has a certain New York feel to it. And a lot of people will say, well, New Yorkers are brusque or they're brash or whatever it happens to be. But and that may be there may be some truth to that in the delivery to some regard. However, my times in New York, I've always found that the New Yorkers are very friendly people and that they'll, they might tell you their opinion, but you can at least, they're not like it's not like they're not talking to you. You can go to some cities and they won't even look at you. And in New York, I mean, if you stare at somebody, they're going to be, what you looking at? You looking at me?
Yeah. You will definitely get a scene at a taxi driver out of that.
Yeah. But, people are not like rude at a traffic light or any of that stuff. I mean, necessarily, like if you're standing there waiting, I suppose if you're driving, it's a different scenario. But a lot of people are around and they all find a way to get to where they're going. And I didn't think it was that.
So I don't think people are necessarily rude. There are rude people.
Sure. Everywhere, though. Yeah.
But something that a lot of people aren't used to is you don't necessarily know your neighbors.
Yeah.
So the block I grew up on, I knew the people that I grew up with. And as time went on, they moved away. But right around the block from my house was an apartment building. There were probably 300 people that lived in there. I'm going to tell you that the 300 people that lived in there probably didn't know everybody that lived in that building.
Right.
I sure as heck didn't know them.
Right.
See, I caught myself.
Yeah, I did. Good job. I was watching you. Yeah.
Yeah, I caught myself there. No blue language.
Yeah.
But you spend a lot of time there not knowing who your neighbors are. And like I, at one point, moved out of the city. And then at some point, I did move back into the city. And it was a little bit tougher not knowing, again, who lived next door to me. Either I didn't see them because they worked opposite hours of me, or maybe they were renting and they were only there for a month or two. You know, and we're very accustomed to, especially living here, we know everybody.
Yeah.
And you might not know them by name,
Yeah.
but you're like, oh, yeah, I know who that is. Or that's the guy that runs, you know, the feed shop, or that's so-and-so from the tire shop, or, hey, that's the guy that serves me coffee.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you get to know each other.
If you wanted to get to know somebody in your neighborhood, where would you go? Or if you wanted to get the scoop on people, where would you, is there a central location in every neighborhood that would be able to give you the lowdown on who everybody is, or it just doesn't exist?
Oh, I mean, you could probably go to your local watering hole, and if they're there. Usually what I'd like to do is you find the old lady that sits on her front porch,
Okay.
and then you make friends with her, and she'll tell you everything that you didn't want to know about everybody that lives on the block.
Yeah. I've always found that when I traveled around in recruiting, and this is in Iowa, but if you went and, we always had to get our hair cut, pretty regularly. And so I just go to the barber, and the barber, a hairdresser, they know everything, you know.
Well,
so probably, you and I currently don't have a huge need for either a barber or a hairdresser, but but maybe back in the day.
I actually had hair.
Yeah.
It was a thing.
Yeah. And so how did you, when did you, well, I'm going to ask a couple more questions about, was New York, in your opinion, as a police officer in that time with, the legend is that when Giuliani was there, that things got a lot better. Is that true?
So
from your perspective, or is that?
Love or hate Rudy Giuliani. I will tell you that he gave New York City back to the people of New York and New York City. He unhandcuffed the police and said, there is no reason that we have all this crime. I want you to go out and do your job. And he brought or put laws back on the books that were not being enforced or that we didn't have time to enforce. And he started with the small things. And if you stop the small things, people will stop doing the big things. So along the way, you enforce the small laws. And obviously, you know, any crime that was committed, you enforce those laws.
Right.
So, like we were never told not to do that. But as you started to clean up the small stuff, people stopped doing the big stuff, because if, you're going to go to jail for drinking a beer on the corner, obviously I'm going to go to jail for selling drugs.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and we've gotten away from that. In a lot of big cities, New York today, but just across the country, a lot of places are saying, like, listen, we can't, what's the point in prosecuting this law that's on the books? We're just going to ignore this one and that one and focus on, I don't know what they focus on, but the result is, I think, probably maybe more crime, right?
Well, that's usually what happens.
Yeah.
If people are allowed to commit small crimes, then the small crimes turn to a little bit bigger.
Yeah.
And
you get away with it. Why not? Now, that being said, I am very libertarian in my politics, in the sense that I think we have probably too many laws, but I never blame the police officers for enforcing the laws that they're supposed to execute. That's part of their branch. They're supposed to execute the laws that the legislature or the governing body puts in place, whatever it happens to be. So you can't blame the police. Like, I don't like it. I don't particularly think you should necessarily need a license to drive a car, in my opinion. However, I know that's not going to change, and it's a law. And so I don't blame, the police officer for giving a ticket for someone who doesn't have a license, which I do, by the way, just to be perfectly clear on all of that, and I also know that if the speed limit is 55 and I'm going 56, that I'm breaking the law. And usually you don't get pulled over for that. But if you do, there's no excuse, to pretend like, oh, well, I was, whatever. It was just like, well, you're breaking the law. And so, which I have been ticketed for, not for 56. Actually, I rarely ever get ticketed, but it's not for lack of trying, I'll tell you that. I really try, but yeah. So what do you think about that?
Well,
am I right? Like, it's not the police officer's fault that you're enforcing the law. It's not like you guys are out there going, today we're only going to arrest people with, green eyes. That's not a law. You can't do that.
right.
Right.
And
Yeah.
you don't have to like the law.
Right.
You have to impartially enforce
Yeah.
the law.
Yeah.
That's what you have to do.
Yeah.
And there are things that, sometimes you have to do. You don't like them, but you kind of got to do them.
Right. On the other hand, I would say that, and I don't know what the solution, if there is one to this, but I grew up watching reruns, to be very clear about this, of the Andy Griffith Show, right? And so that's a very small town, Mayberry, wherever that's at, North Carolina, I think. And then, and of course, Andy Griffith is Andy Taylor, the town sheriff, and with Don Knotts is his deputy, right? And he doesn't carry a gun. It's a very peaceful town. They have very little crime. So not the same situation as New York City by any means. But what I appreciated about I felt like the message of the show wasn't that the police officers in a small town are like Barney Fife, although I'm sure that was something that was in conversation when you were in the precincts in New York City. If some, rube comes in, police officer from, Iowa or whatever, stops by and visits. But at the same time, what I appreciated about it was that I felt like Andy Taylor did a good job of not looking the other way, but having a relationship with the people of Mayberry, which again, not New York, but he had a way of, he executed the law, but he also had a way of understanding kind of what was going on and talking to people. And I think that that's particularly relevant to the young people because the law has a certain language, and that is as it's written. And in that law, then you have people that have to execute that law. And so like in our schools, for example, you and I are both on school board. And, there was a time where I think administrators, and they still do this. So this is not a point against administrators, but our schools, like the principal you were kind of scared to death of your principal because he was the sheriff, or she, or whatever it happened to be. And they executed the law on their own. Very rarely, unless there was like a stabbing, was there a need for law enforcement. But I think that has changed. And so then now we've become more reliant on law enforcement like in the schools, for example. And the problem with that, not the in the schools part, but just the immediate interaction with the law enforcement with youth, whether it's in the school or maybe even on the street, it has to be legitimate, obviously, which it is. You're following the law. But I think there has to be a little bit of Andy Griffith in there, too. Does that make sense?
It makes sense.
And it's probably way harder to execute than to put in, when you put in practice, I suppose.
So, and I cannot speak for every jurisdiction.
Yeah, of course,
obviously everybody has their own policies. So when it came to violations of the law, working in New York City, I was able to what we call warn and admonish. So if you're doing 56 and a 55, I could pull you over and be like, hey, Troy, slow down.
Yeah.
And I can send you on your way.
Right.
Now, I don't know what law is in other places that if they stop you, do you have to be written a summons? I have no idea.
Right.
But when it came to a misdemeanor or a felony, my hands started to get tied.
Right.
And I couldn't just look and be like, well, that's not really this, so don't do this no more.
Right.
Be on your way.
Right.
So and that's tough sometimes because if when you have to go answer to your supervisor later, like, why didn't you do this? And you're like, well, I didn't feel like it met this burden. Well, there's a bunch of people that Monday morning quarterback you, and they'll tell you that, well, you should have done this, and you're now losing X number of vacation days, or you're suspended without pay because you failed to take the action that you took. So it's a little tough sometimes to try to do that Andy Griffin role where you say, hey, all right, boys, shake hands and don't do this again.
Right.
And I'm going to actually tell you that probably about 90% of the people that I've arrested in my lifetime, I actually didn't accuse them of doing anything. Somebody called us and they said, this person did this.
Yeah.
If you gave me enough to go on and I could reasonably hang my hat on your story and you were willing to sign the complaint,
Exactly.
then, you know, that got kicked over to a judge.
Yeah.
You know, person got arrested and this went to court, and this becomes a judge to decide, hey, you know, is this person believable? It wasn't up to me in the street.
Yeah.
And that's tough sometimes because, you know, sometimes you see a different side of it, but I've also gotten in not real trouble, but I've gotten into some trouble or been reprimanded for something that somebody Monday morning quarterbacked and said, well, this person is, you know, adamant that this happened. You know, it's like, well, you know, I didn't see it that way, and they weren't adamant on the scene, and we know who everybody is. We can go just lock them up now, and it becomes a little tough.
Yeah.
You have to deal with that. So sometimes you have to err on the side of caution and go, all right, we're just going to let a judge decide how this plays out.
What about stacking charges? A couple of parts of this, and that's not a negative thing yet, but I was like, if you have to say, first of all, you went to all the training, you went to the academy, somewhere along the line, you learn what all the citations can be, or is there like a reference book or something that you just did? You like, what did you, based on what you saw, do you, does a police officer say, well, this is what I saw, or that the complaint was, is that we took it down, and so we associate those with, you know, like, is there a reference manual, or are you just off the top? I mean, I would say off the top of your head. I suppose if you do it enough, you know what they all are anyway. But
so
where do they, you know, like,
how
do you know what to charge people with?
So some states call it code. New York has the New York State Penal Law, which falls in under a chapter in a code. But when you reference it, you actually reference the penal law. Like, I would not say I'm referencing code 700 of the New York State Code. I would actually say, like, if it was an assault, I'm referencing penal law 120.00, which is now assault. Right. And then we would go down the list. And I don't know if it's necessarily, I understand the term stacking charges, but in certain instances, charges, if you commit assault in the first degree, you've also committed assault in the third degree. And first degree assault would be the higher of the charges. So if I was charging you with assault in the first degree, I'd probably be charging you with assault first degree, second degree, and third degree, because you have actually done all three of these to get to that.
To get to the first.
To get to the first one. Now, that can, on a piece of paper, that can sound bad, but
only one of them more than likely is going to stick.
Something that does happen for people is if there are all three charges and it actually goes to trial on three charges, you have now given the jury the ability to possibly dismiss the top charge and charge the lesser of the charges, or one of the lesser of the charges. But again, this is where your hands kind of get tied, right? And you're doing that. To me, somebody that would be like stacking charges, and it would be weird, is if I'm going to quote the vehicle and traffic law for you failing to signal a lane change, but then I'm going to pull a traffic rule out and charge you with the same exact thing and now write you 2 tickets and then go, oh, wait a minute. Well, they also failed to use a hand signal, so now I'm going to get a 3rd summons out of this.
Yeah.
You know, like, no, now you're railroading the guy. Like, the guy made a left turn, or he switched from the middle lane to the left lane, and he didn't use a signal. So if that's what you're writing him, then write him the summons for that.
Yeah, stacking is probably not the right terminology. I know that in Iowa, for example, I always get a kick out of it. It's humorous to me because, like, with drug charges, illicit drugs, they'll say, like, I'm bringing, I get caught with some drugs, and then you get arrested for possession of drugs, and then inevitably some paraphernalia, which I feel is pretty loose. Like, they're just like, oh, here's a sock. He could have been using the sock, just, I don't know. So, like, that gets a little loose, in my opinion. So you've got the paraphernalia, and then the best one that makes me giggle is failure to affix a drug tax stamp. And it's like, okay, well, like, what drug dealer is going into the courthouse and saying, I'm going to need the proper number of drug tax stamps for 16 pounds of heroin. And they're like, okay, thank you. And then it's just like, can you pull that out? And then the police officer's like, this is the best bust of my life. You got 16 pounds of heroin here. I see you've got a little glass bottle over there, so that's paraphernalia. And I don't see wait a second. You do have the drug tax stamps. Okay, well, fine. I'm not saying that you're an expert in Iowa law at all, but, like, where does that come from? Do they have that in New York, the drug tax stamp?
No, I've never actually charged. No, that I've never charged.
Okay, all right.
But again, this is, every, and there's certain things that, like I said when I referenced, like, an assault to you, like, see, here, I'll give you this.
Yeah.
So we're in New York. You have a newspaper sitting on your lap. You fall asleep.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I take that newspaper off your lap.
Mm-hmm.
Newspaper will say is $1.25.
Okay.
Right. If I went to a newsstand and I took that newspaper, I committed the crime of petit larceny.
Mm-hmm.
But if I took it off your lap because you physically possessed it, I'm actually charged with grand larceny, which is a felony because I've removed it from your person.
Wow.
So there are times where the law doesn't always make complete sense.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard for the person in the street to not charge what the penal law says because it's actually taken out of your hands and between the district attorney's office, because the district attorney's office in New York can say, hey, we're not going to charge this. Or if you had some big incident and the district attorney's office can come up to you and say, we're charging this. This is what you're going to charge on your booking sheets. And this is what we want. And they have that power. So sometimes the law enforcement in the street doesn't have that ability or that flexibility to say, well, I'm just going to charge you with this.
Yeah.
We have to charge you with what we have to charge you with. And then attorneys and judges get involved, and then charges kind of get mediated out. And, that's how that works. And that's why the judicial system is like it is that you have these checks and balances that should be in place to help you out or help the person that's arrested out to get the proper charge.
Yeah. Hello, friends and neighbors. This is Troy Thompson of the Sunnyside of Life. Let's spend this year together reading the Word of God. Just take 10 to 15 minutes a day to join with me in the Sunnyside of Life's Bible in a Year experience. It may be just what you need. Lord knows I do. Besides, it's free, it's fast, and it's good for your soul. And you can start anytime. It doesn't take much to get caught up and on pace with us each day. So, whether you've read the Bible entirely already or you're just looking for a way to get it done, take a few moments with me here and let the good book be the sunny side of your life each and every day. Okay, so you went down a little bit of a rabbit hole there, but it was fun. So you had, when did you leave? When did you said you retired? When did that happen?
So February.
Well, if it's 11 years, okay, I can do the math. Never mind.
February 28th of 2013, I was my last official day.
Okay.
And it was probably 18 months to 2 years later, I actually moved out of New York.
Okay. What did you do? Just hang out? Do you get you get a pension for that?
I do get a pension.
Yeah, good. So do I. Not from the NYPD, but yeah.
So 20 as long as I did my 20 years, I receive a pension. So I did I did a little over 20 years. Did close to 22. About 18 months before I retired, I had, as I said earlier, I had lost my house to Hurricane Sandy.
Okay.
So I was in a little bit of a battle with City Mortgage, trying to get my house rebuilt and whatnot. And I had been going back and forth to court with them because they had the insurance money, and we were fighting back and forth with how that was supposed to be spent and whatnot. And finally, I had thrown my hands up and decided that it was just time to get out of New York. So I packed my stuff or whatever was left, and I picked up and I moved to Florida.
Wow. So really quite, I mean, in that year, within those last 2 years, quite a, momentous life changes. House, career, everything. And you decided to go to Florida and sell real estate. Were you working on a real estate license or anything? Was that your plan after retirement in some degree, or?
No, I retired. When I first retired, a friend of mine had, while I was still living in New York, she had brought me to a company that was selling auto parts. I was actually happily retired, and I had enough on my plate trying to get a house rebuilt, trying to, doing battle with a gigantic bank and mortgage company, stuff like that. And then she was like, hey, I work for this company and we sell auto parts. And I kind of went over there and I was working there part-time a little bit, selling some auto parts. And, it was keeping me occupied, and it was just something to do on a day-to-day basis. But when I moved, I didn't have any great plans of doing anything. Florida's pretty good with income tax. And they're pretty good with real estate taxes. So I had moved, and my neighbor next door was a real estate agent, which if you go to Florida, everybody down there and their dog sells real estate. They probably have a real estate license.
Is that right?
Yeah. It's a big profession down there. And the lady that actually sold me my house got me hooked up with my first real estate company. And then my neighbor next door, she started talking to me one day, and the person that was supposed to be mentoring me through my first real estate sale didn't do a good job of it, didn't mentor me. And I wound up having to go to my neighbor who worked for a completely different agency. And she was able to help me through my first contract. She was able to mentor me through that. Yeah. And it worked out well. And shortly thereafter, her and I actually became business partners. Okay. And we worked together. And it was a great experience.
Yeah. And then at some point, a few years later, I suppose, then you get found by Christy.
Yeah. So I received a message, and not going to lie, it kind of scared me to death. And, when you haven't seen somebody in over 20 years, and I was actually wondering if the text message was, hey, you have a kid. Well, I mean, working for the police department, I also kind of was able to bury my presence online, which was easier to do years ago. So I was able to bury my presence online a little bit, and it wasn't so easy to be found. And, various assignments helped with that.
Yeah.
So, it's just odd when all of a sudden somebody 20 plus years later, and it wouldn't be the first time that I've heard of something like that.
Yeah.
So it was a little scary at first.
And then just conversations over the phone, I suppose, contact, and then...
So it was, a couple of conversations over the phone. It was, emails back and forth. Eventually, we decided that we were going to meet. Of course, Liberty, I have 2 stepchildren, Liberty and Vinton. And I knew that Christy's life with children was going to be in Iowa. So if anybody was going to have to make a move, it would have to be me.
Right.
So I decided that I would, we kept talking. We eventually met up with each other. We hung out, and then I decided that if, this was the relationship I wanted to pursue, I needed to pursue it in the state of Iowa. So I moved to Forest City. It was a little bit of an eye-opener. My come to Jesus moment with living in Forest City in the Midwest was me spilling coffee on myself on my drive out of town.
Yeah.
So I was driving south on Highway 69. I just got outside of Forest City limits, and I was drinking coffee out of a paper cup. Didn't have the lid on tight, and I spilled coffee on myself. And I pull over. I'm half on the gravel, half in the roadway, because what do I know about gravel on the side of a road? I've never seen that before.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, this car comes to a screeching halt, swerves around me, and I think I'm going to get a face full of lung of this guy screaming at me, "You idiot, why are you standing in the roadway?"
Yeah.
And he stopped and he asked me, "Are you okay?"
Mm.
And I tell him the story of, I'm an idiot and I spilled coffee on myself. And he runs back to his truck and he grabs rags and paper towels and he starts drying off my seat as the next car stops, and this woman gets out and asks me if I'm okay. And she offers me a dry set of clothes because her husband keeps a pair of sweatpants and a t-shirt in the car. And then a third car stopped, and I decided Rick had to get the heck out of there because he didn't want to keep telling people that he needs a sippy cup to drink coffee through. And when I got back in my truck and started to drive away, I said, "Wow, this is how you should live." Like people come out, and people that don't know me, just stop their car. "Hey, are you okay?"
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, this is the way to go. This is how you should live your life, where you're not wondering who your neighbors are.
Mm-hmm.
You're here and going, "Hey, can I help you?"
Yeah.
And
That's pretty cool.
And it was an eye opener for me. And I was like, all right, I really like this.
Well, I love that story. That's a great one. When we first started this podcast over a year ago, our first guest was a guy named Don Johnson, and he's moved back to Forest City from Omaha.
Don't you mean from Miami Vice?
Don, yeah, he wishes. Donovan Johnson. And he grew up here, moved away, and came back. And I was like, Don, part of I don't have an outreach, but it's like, I feel like people should pioneer back. Like like we pioneered to get out here and settle the Midwest from the cities or Europe or wherever. And then at some point people said, and we still to some degree say this to our kids, that if, you got to get out of this small town. Now, that's a whole industry of movies and songs and whatnot. It's like, I got to get out of the small town and I got to go and do, got to go see the big city and all that other stuff. And that's great. I agree. I think you should go see. I've been around the world. I think you should definitely see how the rest of the world lives. However, I knew a long time ago that having seen those places, there's nothing wrong with that, but I also knew where I wanted to be. And I think that people might find that there is They won't always find those 3 cars stopping. I mean, they're that won't always be the experience. But I do think that is something that is awesome, and that we encourage, like, people that are not sure who their neighbors are and not sure what their I don't know what the life situations are in some places that I don't live, in big cities particular, but you hear the news stories, you see all of the different things happening, and you go, we got room here. Like, there's plenty of room. We got acreages for sale. I dare you to come out and mow your own lawn. Figure it out. It's a whole new thing.
One of the most common phrases in the truck when we travel, especially when we go to the city, I look at my wife and I say to Christy, "City mouse wants to go back to being country mouse. I don't want to drive in the traffic." I actually, Yeah. It's different. You come out and you mow your own grass. You sit down and you have a conversation at, a fire in your backyard. And people are like, "Oh, what do you mean?" They're like, "You talk to your neighbors?" Yeah. Like, maybe not my very next door neighbor, because maybe he's too old or they're too young or whatever. But, when it's nice out, you have some people over, and they're not always like people that they're not always part of your in group that you travel to, the sports teams with. I've learned a lot living here. Like this, our local girls basketball team, phenomenal year. They did really great. And we have basketball parents that you see constantly and you sit next to, and they become your friends. And some of them are, they have kids in track, and you're through them 3 seasons of sports. Some of them 2 seasons, some of them just 1. But these are people that you see and people that you deal with. I'm talking about the guy that lives across the street from you. That he was out cutting his grass and you were cutting yours, and you start talking, and then it's like, hey, tonight it's gonna get down to 50 degrees. We're gonna have a little fire in the backyard, and maybe he brings over a 6-pack of beer, and you pull out a 6-pack of beer, and you learn something new, and you got to make a new friend.
Yeah,
and you don't get that in a lot of other places.
Yeah. I'll take your word for it. I'm glad we have it here, though.
I'm glad that we have it here, too.
Now, you mentioned the sports teams, and of course, one of the things that you have as a passion or hobby, whatever you want to call it, is you are a photographer, and you are out there taking action photos of our sports teams in the high school and all of these different things. How did that get started? How did your interest in photography develop? And why do you do that?
So, started photography at the ripe old age of about 7.
Okay.
My parents bought me my first full frame. At the time, it was a Canon camera. It was an AE1 program. Used to get film from a company called Dale Laboratories in Florida, and they used motion picture film, converted it to 35 millimeter film. And you got to do a lot of cool stuff with that film when you got it developed. And I learned how to paint with light, where you're kind of killing the lights in a room, and you use a little bit of flash here and there, move some stuff around, or you move the camera around something that's got lights on it, and you kind of create your own image. And I started to play with that. And then photography took a backseat for a few years, got back into it. And then eventually I went digital. And most recently, I've now gone mirrorless. And
say that again. What's that now? Mirrorless?
Mirrorless, yeah.
What's that?
So now there's no more mirror or shutters as we know them in cameras. They work completely differently. Everything is done now to like an XQD card. It's a lot less working parts. One of the cameras that I shoot with is a Nikon Z9, and there is no more shutter in the camera. So it's everything is based off of these giant sensors. They let more light into the camera and whatnot. Sports is new to me. I always enjoyed doing nature type photography, buildings, so landscapes and nature and like architecture. Always enjoyed doing something that didn't have people in it. And primarily because people always look and you'd be like, oh my God, I look fat in this photo. Or,
Be like, well, you are.
well, yeah, you can't say that, but yeah, it's like, I'm sorry, the camera didn't alter your appearance.
Right.
You actually look like the day I took that photo.
Yeah.
But having a 4-season athlete in the house,
Yeah.
and watching him play, and was a start getting back into photography.
Great.
And then Liberty was in band, and I got to watch the band and the color guard and stuff. And I was like, all right, I kind of got to get back into photography. And then watching what you can do taking sports photos. And there are pieces of the photography in there. While I enjoy capturing the people, one of the things I love to do is like you take some track photos, and if you can get the right angle and you can watch that track kind of getting the little pieces of the track that come up through the spikes as the runner is running, and you get all of that and in a freeze frame, and you see that. When I sit back and watch that, I look and go, wow, look at how fast this person is actually moving.
Yeah.
Look at what they're doing. Have some pictures of some of our athletes doing the long jump and just watching them land in the sand and watching how they make that sand explode. And it's just interesting to me that the little pieces that we make move with our momentum. And it's very rewarding for me to now get into the basketball, the football, doing baseball. I think it's really good for our kids to have something. I mean, they are the most probably photographed generation ever in the history of time.
Yeah.
Because they're always taking these selfies of whatever on Snapchat and whatever, and but it's usually their forehead. Like when I see one of them take a photo, it's like the very top of their head, and they send it out to all of their friends. But to watch people go out there and try and be able to photograph that and have them look back at it, or and I've had this in the past when one of the coaches will call me up and say, hey, do you have more photographs of this? And I usually hold on to them for a little while before I get rid of the ones that I don't post or publish. Usually hold on to them for a bit. And I've had coaches go back and say to me, hey, do you have more photos of this date? And I'll go back and I'll look and I'll be like, yeah. And they're like, oh, I'm looking for this person. And they'll ask me for photos. And like there are coaches that have used those photos to help their athlete, and they'll say, hey, listen, when you're doing this, don't bend your leg like that. Get your legs out to here. Here's the photo of what you're doing. And, and that's pretty cool to me that, like you can have that little piece in their life that maybe helps them develop into the next step. But
not just developing a photo, you're developing a person.
Yeah, and it's not the intent, but sometimes that's the outcome.
Hey folks, this is Troy Thompson, and I just wanted to break in here. Now, as you know, we are not monetized. However, you can buy us a coffee. There'll be a little emblem that says you can support the show on whichever platform it is that you are listening to the Sunny Side of Life, and I would be darn honored if you bought me a coffee, so to speak. Or I think the emblem, I changed it to a beer, which seems, to be honest, probably more appropriate. So buy me a coffee, buy me a beer, whatever it is, and that helps support the show so we can continue to develop more and more great skits and have More and more great conversations just like this. And if you do, great. If you don't, that's just fine too. Just wanted to let you know. Now back to the show. There should be no problem documenting, historically speaking, all that is going on, I would say, from the last 20 years forward of all of the images, and every human being, and it seems like, has got multitude of images of themselves and their family.
Yeah.
But it's nice to have really good images, and that is something that obviously you helped create. We had you take some pics for us of our production of Best Christmas Pageant Ever, and we used those as we had them out on the mezzanine in different places where folks could see those, and as prior to the show, in the midst of the show, and that type of stuff. So thank you for doing that. And then I don't want to miss out on the ice cream. So we've got to get to the ice cream. That's more than a hobby. That's a business. You bought that we had we were really making Forest City sound like the all-American, we are Mayberry now. We have, people stop, they help you out, not just one, but triplicate. And then we've got, just a friendly local guy who comes and takes pictures, and everybody, and just, now we have an ice cream shop. We had an ice cream shop, before that the Keeleys, started, Julie Keeley, and had that going. And they did that, I don't know for maybe 10 years. I don't know how long, quite a while it seemed like. And then they were ready to sell, and you bought it.
So this started out for us somewhere between a joke and a rumor.
Okay.
The person will remain nameless, but a customer came in and said, "Congratulations, I heard you bought the ice cream shop." And I laughed because the person is kind of like you. They like to joke around.
Mm-hmm.
And this persisted for a couple of days. And I went, they're not exactly pulling, they're pulling my leg a little bit, but they're not exactly pulling my leg. And I said, I didn't even know the ice cream shop was for sale.
Mm-hmm.
And we went and we talked about it, and we made the inquiry.
Mm-hmm.
And we knew that if we wanted to do that, we wanted the whole building, and the ice cream shop all together. So we pursued that avenue of it. The only thing that we kind of wanted to do was make it our own. So we did some remodeling inside just to make it our own.
Right.
And I give credit where credit is due. My father-in-law he's just a genius when it comes to figuring stuff out. It was a labor of love with, Mitten, my father-in-law, and myself, getting up there and doing a lot of that work. And we got the remodeling done. And then the only question was, what kind of ice cream did we really want? And we did some taste testing. And the chocolate shop out of Madison, Wisconsin, I will tell you, they are an awesome company. They made sure that there was nobody else selling their product close by before they agreed to even talk to us. And then they brought us out there and gave us a tour of their entire facility. They talked to us, let us know what they were about. And from there, we went to ice cream school. They help you. And
wow.
They taught you how to, scoop ice cream. They taught you what to use, how to do it, how to make waffle cones and stuff like that. So They got us underway. And, now we do soft serve custard. We do Madison Shop hard-packed ice cream. We make homemade waffle cones. During the off season, we have managed to stay open, which is new to Forest City.
Yeah.
We stay open all year long. During the what we'll call off season months or winter months, we operate off of a calendar. So our calendar is on social media and our website, and we let you know what days we're open. Come the summertime, we will be open 7 days a week. But
gotta have it.
Yeah.
Yeah, gotta have it. And I know that you did something new this year, something that you guys did that hadn't been done before, I don't think. And that was the ice cream advent calendar.
Yeah.
Which was, both of our boys that are still at home, they had that. And I was like, where are you getting these little Where are you getting these little cups of ice cream? You know, like, I don't understand where these are coming from, you know. And they didn't tell me till it was done, you know.
Well, they needed to protect their...
They did protect it.
Yeah, they needed to
protect it. Did a good job.
Yeah. So I will give my wife credit where credit is due. My wife is absolutely amazing at figuring things out that keep us going, and doing so in a way that helps promote our business, and that's fun for our patrons and fun for the community. You know, it's rough being an ice cream shop in Forest City, Iowa in the wintertime. Now, granted, this year for most of the winter, we did have some
pretty good weather.
It doesn't happen every year if you're from a state that you don't necessarily want to move here.
Yeah.
No. So it was rough. Community was not used to us being open.
Yeah.
And we had to do things that got creative to figure out how to stay open, because we're trying to keep the staff that we have employed.
Yeah.
You know, if we don't open, we can't keep them.
Right.
And we have a pretty good staff that I'm actually super proud of. So they've done right by the community and stuff like that. But Christy is really good at figuring things out, and she figured out this advent calendar. She was looking at something online and she was like, well, you know, they do this with this. Why can't we do it with ice cream? And thus the invention of the advent calendar with ice cream.
It's a great invention.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, we've been having a good conversation here for about an hour and a half, and that's about as long as I usually go. My listeners, some of them say, I need a bigger yard in the summertime because they'll listen to me while they're mowing the lawn, and they need more lawn to mow, apparently, to get through it all. But I tell you what, Rick Wiley, from cop to real estate, I want to keep it all with C, so we can go cop, coffee, and ice cream cones. Yeah,
cones,
ice cream cones. Yeah, I thought I had it, I missed it. The alliteration didn't work out there, but cop, coffee, and cones. It's a cone. It's a cone. Yeah. And it's an awesome story. I'm glad that you're here in what's my hometown, your hometown now, and glad to be on the school board with you and working together with that, seeing you at the sporting events, having this conversation with you today, and just so appreciative of doing the things that you do for the community and being a part of our uptown and our business community and the chamber and all of that other stuff. And folks, this is what it's all about. When we say on the sunny side of life, we want you to go out and be the sunny side of somebody else's life. We want to be active and useful and involved, to pursue the passions that make you happy, or in this case, the pursuits that make us all happy, I guess, when you talk about ice cream. Those are things that, Rick, you fully embody, and just want to say thanks so much for coming out and chatting with me at Sunnyside.
Thank you for having me. I have to tell you, I was real nervous because the topic was me, and I don't necessarily like talking about me, but it's been a pleasure being here, and I am very honored that you chose me to be on your podcast, sir.
I want to thank all our friends and guests for stopping by for this episode of the Sunny Side of Life. All the Sunny Side of Life players who stopped by, creative support provided every day by my incredible wife Heidi and our fantastic 4 boys. Thanks to every one of our listeners. That means you. A big shout out to my brothers and sisters in uniform holding the line around the world. Share the word, folks. Let the people know what we're up to. Subscribe so you never miss an episode, and follow us on social media. All skits are written or adapted and directed by me, Troy Thompson, and are produced here at Sunnyside Farm Studios and delivered to all platforms by Buzzsprout. Music and sound effects are provided by Soundstripe. The Sunny Side of Life is a weekly production about our life on the family farmstead here in Iowa, the liberties we prize, and the pursuits which make us happy. Now, none of this is possible without Christ in our lives. For the Lord God is our sun and our shield. He gives us grace and glory. So may the Lord bless you and keep you, and may the sunny side of your life, liberty and pursuits, be in Christ, and made evident unto you each and every day and give you peace.